The Płaszcze magazine. The nicest place to meet was now Wanda's studio, where the kitchen and the living room were together, so no matter where you sat, you still sat in the kitchen, which was the thing that they felt was seriously missing from the house, where barely one person could stand quietly next to the stove. At Wanda's they looked out of the filthy windows over the foliage of the garden suburb, smoked a ton, drank a couple of bottles of cheap wine, and made plans. The biggest plan wasn't born during a verdant spring, but on the most depressing day of all days of the year. It was the afternoon of the 20th of January, and the sky was rapidly darkening. Warsaw was frozen, it was bitterly cold, and skinny dashes of smoke rose straight out of chimneys. With a sheer overcoat and gloveless red fingers, Sulislav trudged resolutely down Shkolna Street towards a benevolent white window. The other companions were on their way to the same destination, only along different routes. Jerzy Nemec, hunched with his red hair down to his fleece coat collar, his glasses foggy, and his dark thoughts behind his white brow, and Arkadiusz Rusnak with his folder of drawings tucked under his arm, as always. Adam and Wanda had thrown all the clutter into a corner to fit them. In with all that stuff was an odd wooden sculpture, a creation sawn out of thick plywood, which was at once a life-sized mannequin, coat hanger, and modern art. Wanda had hung a whole mountain of long, colorful chains of wooden beans on its neck. The cramped front room was filled with cold overclothes and Sulislav's happy clamor. It was actually Jerzy who put the idea of a magazine in their heads that evening. They'd spread themselves out pleasantly in the room. Some of them were sitting on a wooden platform conceived as a place for naked women in the daytime and a rolling mattress in the night-time, so that the surface could also be used as a bed. It was an extremely nice place to sit and to cover with coffee cups and wine glasses. Books were stacked high around it, and Wanda brightened up the mix by adding every color of shoe. These had clearly once been in rows according to some system, but since the system wasn't self-regulating, the usual picture was half an hour of Wanda looking angrily for her other shoe every time she went out. Arkadiusz had set himself in a chair apart from the others in order to have a good view of them. He sat one leg over the other with a frumpy cap on his head and drew quick-fire drawings into his sketch pad. The outlines of Sulislav's mug were already there, his hair bedraggled and his mouth open as he sat on one leg with the other hanging down off the chair. So how would it be if we tried to do something that would leave a mark for a change? Jerzy said. He was sitting on the edge of the platform with his shoulders lifted high up under a black sweater, and he peered out at them like a wise black raven. His body was hunched gently forward to give his words the necessary intensity, while his knees were bent with his legs facing away from them, as if to show that his words were still not to be taken too seriously. I was thinking about the magazine. We've collected enough material from the time in the house that the first issue is basically already there. I'd start, he eyed Adam slyly, with unauthorized excerpts from the pen of Adam Mickiewicz, because polite society tells him never to take any of his opportunities and acts as if that's for his good. But Adam's the kind of guy who'd definitely do stuff, if he had any idea what to do. Jersey rubbed his nose slowly and thoughtfully with his sleeve. For his part, Adam was squatting on his heels next to the bed and mechanically twiddling a lock of his hair with his left hand. He had a slightly vacuous expression on his face, as if to say something like, Based on this guy's first literary attempt, it's clear how big a pain writing actually is. It's a punishment laid on a person for their sins. Everybody would prefer not to write, and if you're already overcome yourself and managed those heroics once, it's its own sin to hide it from your readers. Because it's not just Adam, he explained like a professor, but many others too, who don't read to learn anything, but just to have something to do. Let's fill Poland's time with culture. And anyway, people love to read about other people's toothaches, other people's real estate problems, bad moods, whatever. This way, even simple people can experience high literature. Yeah, the first time I read that, I couldn't sleep right for a week. Salislav butt in. He'd been listening intently. That text was born right when it seemed like his relatives were gonna evict us and sell the house. Unless Adam and company could manage to find a bunch of cash somewhere. Which we didn't, of course. And now we've all left the house. Even Jersey. Remember when Adam was dissecting the opportunity to move into Wanda's like a fortune teller? I split my sides. And then he said that if it got too draining for Wanda, he'd go back and live with his mom, just like everyone else. Everybody has to have a period on the way to independence when he moves back in with his mom and grows a beard down to his knees. It's a sign of maturity. There was some snickering. Their young faces, earlier stiff from the cold, reddened and shined slightly in the room's warmth. One could see at a glance that they were melting, which was making them amenable to almost any idea. This drove the speaker on with new aplomb. Goddamn Makivich walks up and down the house and bums around like everybody's way like an asshole. So I told him, just write an actual book about philosophy. You might as well just sit down and start. So Spot here goes and grinds away for 3 hours. Hard to predict when the book might make it to print at this rate. Still though, this guy has to write. Sulislav finished with conviction. Well, there you go. Now it will make it to print. But not just into any silly bookstore, of course. Our magazine will be a work of art, like a couple hundred passed from hand to hand. Because there's no paper printed through a state publisher that runs thousands of copies, and where you can just openly talk about anything. Never. Nowhere. But that doesn't mean nobody prints them. There are oceans of them, even in Tsarist Russia, each more radical than the next. Jersey let the tension out of his body and leaned half sunken on his elbows as he gauged the effect of his words. The majority of them seemed to be genuinely indifferent. Arkadiusz quickly turned the page of his sketchbook and tried to capture Jersey's new pose. To Jersey, they seemed like cows in need of a prodding. They needed some assignments, and someone needed to make Adam the shepherd. Listen, go around and beg people for submissions. We have plenty of pulp to start with, but we have to have stuff in reserve. It would be good if Wanda could put some of her graphics in, and Arkadiusz can add in his non-conceptual art and art theory. You know, the way he understands it, with anger and contempt for everything he doesn't understand. There's no point talking about Suliswav's stuff. For that I mean, it's just a matter of how you convince this mule to take the tiniest step back from his other idealism and deal just a tiny bit with the real world, where things don't sparkle all the time. Sulisław, go rummage around for your poetry collection. We'll gather up everyone who cares about theatre, film, music, books, and get them to talk about what's actually important to them. I will be writing a new history for Poland, Sulisław announced fervently. He'd gotten up and was pacing in front of the platform like a colonel on parade. It'll be unprecedentedly beautiful. Not about what didn't happen, but what might have happened. Not why not, but where did it go? Because beauty is in the missing possibilities, the failed possibilities, in the shining flame of fancy, in all the branches cut off at the stem that led nowhere and came to nothing. Because the only thing as beautiful as pure fancy is that fancy not coming true. Reality'd have wrecked it straight off. Maybe then don't start a magazine, offered Wanda, who'd only been listening in. As much as she might have loved these boys, she sensed in her heart that there was something in them that was old-fashioned, even obsolete. In truth, this expressed itself most of all in their attitude toward girls, who were in any case only for decoration and to keep their moods up. Of course, girls might also contribute something nice to the project. Oh please, with pretty pictures. Because eventually it will become something Sulisław doesn't like. Wanda brought over a big red teapot and put it in the center of the table. I can imagine how we're going to be sitting right here again in a year, and Sulisław will try to convince everybody that the project has failed, that no one is up to the task, and there's no point doing anything. And you'll spend half the time on the layout anyway, because it'll never be as nice as it should be. Yeah, Savisha agreed. That is how it will go. And in that time other people will have barely gotten themselves running. What's to do when people live at different speeds? Mine is presto, but Potato Head over here, he pointed a finger at Adam, lives at twice as slow as Largo. But there are still marvels in that lethargic head of his, which is why I'm absolutely happy to try another fruitless crack at cultural autonomy. The plan was to publish the magazine once a quarter, and it would be thick. Adam was made secretary, but the title of this chairman's position became the cozier homeroom teacher over time. He made sure that the contributions came in, begged for them on bended knee, even serenaded people beneath their windows, if that's what it took to get a particularly shining submission out of a particularly evasive essayist. Bear in mind that everything depended on persuasiveness and animal magnetism. They didn't mix money into such a noble undertaking. Where would they have gotten it? Everything was done for free and by choice. The first issue brought along all kinds of fops they barely knew. Everybody looked up all their friends and relatives who had at least a scrap of brain function. Le premier numero contained an enthusiastic but confused smorgasbord of school assignments, commercial bulletins, ads masquerading as reviews, and an outsized number of columns devoted to obscure Western music, because when it came to their musical tastes, Płaszcze's members were far from run-of-the-mill. No, they ferreted out, shared and listened to only the most covert tones tramping around in the dark. They also brought the national underground scene to the fore, undertook long, rambling interviews, and generally ignored issues of grammar, which limped through the articles on three legs. Language has to be alive, Sulisław announced to his opponents, who were ready pen in hand to fix misplaced commas. When you attack it with vile norms, language is ruined. It doesn't matter that we've been told to write by the rules of the last century, or the last decade, or the last year. What matters is that that's the death of language. If our brother Theophile expresses himself in pidgin, then that's how it has to be. What happens to a juicy style and a pleasant venom if you edit it bland? Might as well just get all our articles from one person, who can just be the copy editor. Leave the errors in. They're distinctive. One of their contributors was a poetizing actor who had what amounted to a personal theory about language cancer, which grows into a frenzied monster in a normal tongue, and it is never entirely clear whether it is a benign or a malignant formation. Cultural heroes as much as mouldy, office-bound academics set about interpreting the vague, unknown line between creative and destructive language play, building barricades for the defense of pure, beautiful, flawless Polish, and publishing grammar handbooks that castigate, now the jargon, now the loanwords, now the vulgarisms that can so grate on people's ears. This is unavoidable, because language is not only a matter of taste, knowledge or style, but is 1,000 registers, and we must not lose a single one. Because when you lose shoddy language, trite or flawed language, said the frizzy-haired actor, what will shoddy, trite people say? Language is an effect, not a cause. Everything that exists needs to express itself in its own way. Bureaucrats simply have to use an official register. Uneducated new mouths have to use that nasty babbling baby talk. Repeat offenders the argot of prisons. Party hacks, slogans. And what doesn't exist yet has to look for completely new forms. That's the province of poetry. There are language puritans and language revolutionaries, but language goes its own way anyway, Adam mused. His comrades considered his writings to be adorably old-fashioned. One might also have seen them as utterly avant-garde, because Adam's style was defined by two things. First, a rich vocabulary in which a whole batch of words were long disused oddities like carriole, landau, nenufar, and sallow thorn, while another bunch were long, snaking philosophical terms that everyone pretended to understand but had no clue about, and second, by a sense of lacunae, as if a part of his thoughts was left unwritten, unsaid, or intended in silence. The real content of the text was formed through these silent grooves. The cover of the first issue of Płaszcze was designed as and entitled Non-Existent Comic Strip of the Author. It was a symbolic act because the comic itself had a kind of decadent Western thrust that wasn't appropriate as a work of art. Such a provocative cover signaled two things at once. There are things we're not allowed to do, but we'll do them anyway. And indeed, Arkadiusz Różnak, aka Rękawicz's artful comic was printed nicely along with wholly 6 introductions to obscure music groups, some of which were written in French. This gave a clear signal that the scope of the magazine was far and away above that of others, that this here was a cosmopolitan rag. Not in a kind of lowbrow, trashy sense, but among the best in the world, because creation doesn't observe national borders. What's more, Sulisław was obsessed with the idea that in order to break out of Poland, they needed to free themselves from Polish's sweet chains, and he used every opportunity to attain a freely organic French fluency. He wanted to speak it better than his mother tongue, in which he was nowhere near Adam in any case. He knew not a single amusingly archaic word, but he might also demonstrate complete ignorance of a common, contemporary one. What's that mean? Huh, funny word. Suliswav's ear for language was rooted more than anything in sound, and although he didn't know the names of old agricultural tools, he had an immense interest in old place names and people's names. When he heard a word, he had a kind of immediate visualization, and this symbiosis of sound and imagination largely dictated the way he saw the world. For his forthcoming famous article about an alternative called of Polish Kingdom, he dug around in old books for days to find just the right, just the most distinctive, historical names, to express his vision most exactly. He didn't hesitate to form wild combinations from Greek or Nordic mythology and then put them in starkly foreign environments. If one of his friends was at a loss for names, Sulislav would simply glow. I can give you names by the ton. Let's start. Just tell me what kind of guy he is. Opulence, he might randomly say, is the kind of word that contains its whole meaning end to end. What a conceited dude Opulence is. He's got all the nice things in the world, all its golden throne rooms, everything rich, overflowing, full of its own importance. There's Louis XIV with his wig and his sceptre, and he's got a chubby leg in a silk stocking stuffed into a tight shoe covered in diamonds, ermine coat over his shoulders. Then over here is Oriental splendor, hundredweight Persian carpets, Venetian glass mirrors, hookahs with cherub decorations. Hey, what the hell is a cherub anyway? And now that it's come up, I've been banging my head non-stop over this. In Adam's unauthorized excerpt, there was the phrase "chez quoi." I've been banging my head over that this whole time. Shed, Adam answered, is cabagnon in French. See also shack, hovel, shipping container, Uncle Tom's cabin, ruins. Quite! Polish adverb that indicates a kind of incompleteness. I am quite tired. Quite many people went to the concert. A very elegant and erudite explanation, Pan Makiewicz. Still, it is only unfortunate that it isn't spelled qua. Qua would be kind of feminine undertone variant of swine or devil. Example sentence. A smelly, clammy mop qua was stewing in the sink. Solislav shuddered at the imagination. This time, Arkadiusz's comic yielded to the journal's main attraction. For the first time, Jerzy Niemiecz's hotly sought-after graphic series, Thought Experiment, was distributed in print. It was composed of a dozen human heads distorted in an Art Deco style, and in which the fluidity of the psyche was feathered with strict, geometric ornamentation. These were the old pieces that everyone had marveled at and secretly craved. They implored him unceasingly to do more of them, and he presumably could have lived his whole life off this trick of throwing together little symbolic men with bumpy globular heads. The drawings came with Roman numerals, but were otherwise nameless and untitled. But it was not as if Jersey's monsters weren't known by colloquial names. Esprit Troubleman, or Un drôle d'état little guy, or Thujajud, the last of which sent Suliswav into practically simian glee, and he shouted over the makeshift workroom. "Hands off Thujajud! I claim him as my own. I'm gonna put it on the cover of my poetry collection and name my cat after it, and hang it off the side of my Zeppelin." This is the first time we hear of the Zeppelin, which had always existed but appeared only now. Jersey looked at him calmly and only said, faintly, "Fuck off, you lazy twat. When are you getting to work?" The exact quote from Savisha's ode to Jersey's creation sounds like this. "Thujajud is like Baal, ram horns, and also like a philosopher, still ram horns. Maybe it's actually ionic columns between which Thujajud's head opens into a book. One might now think pagan wisdom if it weren't for his black cassock. The pilgrimage into the world of symbols continues. Wait for the detective novel Sherlock Poole or Jersey and Clyde, based on a true story. He's not yet decided which." The rest of the issue's content was expectedly eclectic and not of the highest quality. A young documentary filmmaker introduced the first film, two poets interviewed each other, and somebody writing under a pseudonym and wishing to remain anonymous submitted a long, confused screed about the Second World War that even exhausted the inquisitive Suliswav, who greenlit the text while muttering that they ought to do something with it beforehand. "It's all an unintelligible jumble. Put some subheadings in or something." But then he shrugged and waved the idea off. There were also some very bold photos of a cigarette-smoking beauty, which caused quite a row at the editorial board. The boys were a surly group, and this kind of lifeless bourgeois vibe was not up their alley. "Ugh, what's she smoking like this for, huh? Just for looks. Why's she so pink and purple? And what's she even doing besides being in a photo shoot? Just hanging around." "You don't understand," Suliswav shot back. "A person is something primal, vital. If nature makes something as beautiful as this girl, I mean look at her lips, and then somebody goes and uses a camera and lighting to trick you into thinking she's even more beautiful, then that's somehow vulgar and cruel way. And then that's exactly why it's cool." His adversary didn't drop it. "For me, the thing that works well with photography is when a person's individuality has been somehow captured or opened. But she's just absolutely cookie cutter, distant, vague, as a person." Suliswav shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, forgive me. A beauty shot plus capturing individuality. Here. Open your mouth a bit and look over here, you ridiculously well-proportioned beefcake. Perfect. Wait, okay, hold that look, but use your eyes to show me your personality. You like traveling, you think jeans are comfy, and you're happy that you're not in Moldova anymore." We might also mention the section "A Poem." They always found something extra good to go there, because there was never any reason to worry about young poets not writing, and even less reason to think it would be minor fluff. The magazine's directors were chuffed. They passed around their firstborn with open hands, left it out to sit in common popular places, and soon they had a line of fans out the door. Their circle grew practically by the day. Their devoted apostles showed in by the door and the window. Many of them became long-time Płaszcze members, and, most importantly, many of them were girls. Not just any old girls. Awesome girls. The picture series depicting superpowers arising from the domains of different mental faculties remained Jersey's only addition to this holy undertaking. He came to editorial meetings for about 6 months thereafter, and Jersey's image was on the list of the staff for another 3 years, until an invisible hand wiped it away. The man closed himself off in his former solitude and spoke to no one. It was as if he'd set his friends to work to get them out of his way, but also as a parting gift. It would give meaning to their lives, and they could look back on it later as a time of unity, youth, and invincibility. This was their chief ideologue's cunning plan.